Hey, it's Mr. Spencer. We're talking about Chapter 1, how small word choices can have great significance in The Great Gatsby. Okay, on page 8 specifically, I want to look at this passage. Nick Carraway, he's the narrator. He's just moved to Long Island next to New York City after graduating Yale. Okay, he mentions New Haven. That's in New Haven, Connecticut, where he originally met Tom Buchanan. Note F. Scott Fitzgerald also went to Yale, and he participated in World War One. All right, this is all leading up to page 8. So page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He was originally a Midwesterner. Remember, Fitzgerald's from Minnesota originally. And Nick is invited to have dinner on the East Egg Peninsula part of the island with his old college buddy Tom and his wife Daisy, who is Nick's second cousin once removed, he says. As Nick walks into Tom and Daisy's enormous house, he meets a tall woman with her chin up in the air in a somewhat snobby manner. This is Jordan Baker, a famous professional golfer and friend of Daisy's. Okay, you with me? Now, Fitzgerald chooses his words very carefully in this description on page 8. Okay, if you've got your book, I encourage you to highlight this section and maybe write down a couple notes here. Okay, as you and Nick meet Jordan Baker here, Fitzgerald uses a simile to compare both Jordan and Daisy's position, and their posture are described as somewhat floating. Okay, they have a very upper class, upper crusty, rich posture. They're buoyed up as though upon an anchored balloon. Notice a motif of floating and water patterns all throughout the book, some like these eyes floating on the book cover. Okay, and this water pattern will reassert itself all throughout each of the 9 chapters. So pay attention to that. Maybe highlight it in your book and maybe look for things that are floating or watery or the color blue as you annotate them in your book. Also, notice the dramatic movements in this scene. Okay, Nick's just walking into the room, but it's not completely stationary. There are things moving. Okay, it's shown in Fitzgerald's verb choices. Verbs are the action words. Okay, Fitzgerald uses words like buoyed, rippling, fluttering, blown, shut, died, and balloon. I kind of think this dramatic presentation may mimic how dramatic the boredom and the carelessness of Jordan, Daisy, and Tom and these upper crusty East Eggers are. So the drama of it is, okay, they're rich, they don't have much to do, they sit around all day and drink. They sit around and just read a magazine and chit chat. Their butlers and their servants do most of the work for them. This boredom, this restlessness, it's so dramatic the way you hear Daisy talk about it. Now look at those verb choices, the movement and the action here. Okay, I've got a GIF here, and this is moving a little bit from a scene from the 2013 movie. What symbolism might be extrapolated from these small word choices? How can small word choices have great significance? Consider words like, I have a dream, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. How could small word choices have great significance? What symbolism could we extrapolate from these small word choices? One critical reading of this passage is to maybe look at it and apply it to the rise and fall of the American dream or the American economy in the 1920s. Consider how Nick's story takes place in the summer of 22, he says, 1922. F. Scott Fitzgerald published The Great Gatsby in 1925. The economy was going up, up. Stocks were rising. People using credit and credit all the time, spending, writing checks. They didn't have the money. IOU, they got credit. They buy new washing machines. They buy new kitchen appliances. They're buying new automobiles. The stock market crash of 1929 led to the Great Depression. What goes up must come down. Okay, look at some of these examples here. The stock market crash, 1929. All right, this was an example where after the roaring 20s, where everything seemed to be going up, everybody was having fun, prosperity, economic booms, widespread prosperity, new wealth, new money for people. Okay, that's what people were getting. And then it crashed in 1929. And this seemed to precipitate or be a prelude to what becomes in the 1930s in the United States, the Great Depression. All right, so in 1929, the stocks crash and everything starts to go down, like the balloon. Does this anchored balloon also start to go down? So, could Fitzgerald have predicted that all the fortunes would go bust from this 1920 period? He wrote the book in 1924, published it in 1925. Is it possible that the anchored balloon symbolizes the American economy? It was anchored. It was anchored by an infrastructure, by the banks, by a system of IOUs and credit versus debit. If you want to get into the economic stakes, it was not sustainable. The bubble burst. The balloons popped. Too many people invested, and not enough people were supporting it with actual gold, silver, currency to back it up. And then the banks lost a lot of money. Some people lost billions of dollars. Many people committed suicide, especially working in Wall Street, because they lost their entire life savings after investing much of it throughout the 1920s. After an economic boom, there's the word right there in the passage. Could the wind go out of the sails for the U.S. economy in the 1920s as it slowly ballooned to the floor in the 1930s, precipitating the Great Depression? Now, this is an analysis of interpretation. I'm giving an interpretation of this. I can't prove that that's what Fitzgerald meant. I can't prove that Fitzgerald was predicting this, but I can make a pretty strong argument for some of these word choices. Very curious word choices. Okay, very dramatic verbs are used, and then the booming, the shutting, the dying with a whip snap and a groan. The roaring 20s came to a stop, like a balloon that started to slowly drift down to the floor, like an automobile driving along and then losing control of the car. We'll continue some of these with how small word choices can have great significance. And in the next video I make, we'll take a look at the Valley of Ashes in Chapter 2. This is Mr. Spencer, signing off.